Hello and welcome to another episode of the Forgotten Places channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about the NFL's stadium problem. Now, what do I mean by that exactly? So essentially now we have about 10 or so stadiums that were built for over $1 billion and have all the bells and whistles ever since Cowboys Stadium, basically, or whatever you want to call it, AT&T Stadium. They have gotten extremely expensive and have clubs and mega scoreboards and, just things that have ballooned the cost of these stadiums. And so far, that's worked for the wealthy, huge cities like New York, Dallas, etc. But now comes a time where push is going to come to shove with stadiums in smaller markets that are aging. Now, as most of you know, in the 90s and into the early 2000s, many stadiums in the NFL got replaced. And some were just built for new teams. But to run through a few here, you had Cleveland, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, Washington, Tampa, Seattle, New England, and several others. And that doesn't even include the ones that were built for expansion franchises such as the Panthers and the Jaguars and the Texans. And so now we're getting close to the end of the leases to all of those stadiums. And in case you don't know, stadium leases are basically the only thing that keeps an owner from moving an NFL team. Yes, there is a vote that has to be placed, and there also is the relocation fee, but as far as legally binding a team to a city, the lease of the stadium is what keeps them in town. So what's going to happen here? Well, you have all these teams now demanding hundreds and hundreds of $1 million renovations. We're not talking about replacing the lights here. We're talking about spending almost $1 billion just to transform what exists already. And more alarmingly, you have several teams that have stadiums that are less than 30 years old that haven't completed that first lease, that there's already been discussions and articles about replacement stadiums. You have Washington, Carolina, Cleveland, Tennessee, Denver, Chicago, all looking at possibly replacing their stadiums. And none of them are 30 years old yet. And why is this happening? Well, the reason that this is happening is you had all those stadiums built 20 to 25 years ago, and they were built in that era for that era. And then you have the ones that were built between 14 to 10 years ago or less, and those are they're on steroids by comparison. And the NFL wants their brand to be more uniform. They want them all to be to that top tier standard. But the problem is not every city can afford that top tier standard. It doesn't matter if they have an NFL team. Baltimore is not as rich as Dallas. Detroit is not as rich as New York City. It's just simple economics. And what you have now are these so-called expert inspectors claiming that these stadiums like the Browns Stadium or the Titans Stadium are no good anymore. They're claiming, oh, they're poorly built and it would require more money than it would cost to completely build a new one, or just as much or almost as much. And frankly, I think it's a bunch of BS. These people are probably being paid by the teams, or they're told to make up a headline, and then everybody thinks, oh, it's no good anymore. But if that's really true, then how is it that these college football stadiums can last 100 years? Obviously these stadiums are built a lot better than the ones that were built 100 years ago. And they were built for lasting a lot longer. Those cookie cutter stadiums of the 70s and 60s even, those were built not that great. They were very basic. They didn't have much luxury seating at all. And so it was more understandable and acceptable for them to be torn down after 30 years because they were pretty obsolete by the time that they were torn down. And they also were a lot cheaper to build. So really the problem that the NFL has is they want everybody to fork out top tier money for top tier facilities now, even though there are just simply cities that are not financially as able to put up $2 billion for a stadium as others. And they'll preach, well, you could host a Super Bowl, But I mean, let's be real. How much of an economic impact overall is that going to pay off for one time, maybe twice in several decades? So I'm not sure what's going to happen exactly. I think there's going to be a lot of resistance to forking out all the money because it's exploded so much as far as what it costs to renovate or replace now, and these cities, they're not going to be satisfied with, replacing a venue that's not even 30 years old, because these were built to last longer. So I think over the next 5-10 years or so, there's going to be a lot of push coming to shove as far as cities and the league coming to agreements on what to do about these stadiums. Because there's certain ones like Cincinnati, for example, that the sales tax that they passed to fund the original stadium isn't even covering it. It's short on funding, and I highly doubt they're going to just be willing to throw a bunch of money, more money, on a venue that's not even really being paid for with the tax that it was set up for. So let me know what you think. Do you think the NFL is getting out of hand with their funding demands for stadiums? Or do you think some of these venues do need to be massively upgraded to first-tier status? Let me know what you think, and as always, thank you for watching.